Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Gambler, written by PerilousPlatypus. A single card was drawn. Death. The deck was shuffled. 2 cards were drawn. Death, Devil. Feyre exhaled and looked at Commander Gunner Hallock, who stood nearby on the bridge of the ENS Deep Domain. There is trouble at Vesunia, Commander. Nothing could be certain, but it was Feyre's business to understand the goings-on in far-off places. She had come to the Deep Domain to provide the service, and it was her responsibility to ensure the commander was well informed of the state of the frontier. Humanity's enemies pressed in everywhere, seeking to control the unseen paths that would lead them to the cradle of human civilization. The commander looked up from the hollow map displayed in the tactical pip, his face a grimace.
What sort of trouble, Seer?
Death and the devil, she replied. Gunner's grimace deepened.
The Xerxes, then.
Feyre shrugged. There was a level of specificity the cards could not provide. Astral seers could gather a sense of things as they were and as they might be, but the details were much more difficult to parse. I could do a full reading, but it'll take some time to prepare. It is unlikely to provide a better picture than the assumptions drawn from what you already know. Gunner would be much better informed of the likely nature of the threats at Vesunia and the best way to respond. What she offered him was knowledge at a speed otherwise impossible. Feyre told him of the gathering storm. He turned back towards the tactical pit.
Strategist Markham, status on the Vesunian system.
The holomap shifted, moving from a depiction of a sector the Deep Domain was responsible for to a single system within that sector. Vesunia. Various markers immediately appeared, depicting the last known status of the system. Vesunia had various strategic assets, including an astral node, a small local fleet, and a military outpost. The outpost wasn't self-sustaining, and periodic supply drops were largely responsible for its continued existence. Unfortunately, the system did not have a permanently stationed Farcaster, so updates were limited to updates from those supply drops.
There's not much going on, Commander, Markham said. The node is highly networked but poorly mapped.
He gestured at the map, zooming in on the node. A series of pulsing lines, green, blue, and red, spread out from the node, intersecting with various others before spreading off into unknown space.
The reds are primarily leading into Yik space, but a few are Gors. There are 2 greens, one leading right back here, and another a few hops from any human nodes of note. But it's within our perimeter. The Vesunian node isn't hardened yet, so it is a weak point.
Gunner nodded.
When is the next supply drop? Markham checked. Months out.
Gunner turned back to Feyre.
Do you have the strength for a 3rd draw?
It would be a challenge. She had been scrying for hours already, and she was exhausted. Her fingers were already numb, making it hard to feel the deck. Still, moments like these were when her services were at their greatest import, and the Deep Domain did not have any other seers. I can manage it. She reached down at her side to the embossed case holding a deck. Her fingers ran through the clasp as she closed her eyes, feeling a whisper of chaos and fate swirling around her. She pulled the clasp open and reached within the case, drawing out the deck. Practiced fingers rifled along the deck, separating it into parts and then shuffling them together, squaring the corners and then cutting the deck when fate called it to cut. 1 card. Riff, shuffle, square, and cut. 2. Again. 3. She turned the cards over, one by one, feeling more drained with every movement. Any reading was a daunting task, particularly across distances such as these. There was so much that could interfere, so many possibilities. Pulling meaning from the chaos was no simple thing. Asking 3 questions instead of 1 simply magnified that effort. Death, devil, hanged man in opposition. A sheen of sweat covered Feyre's brow, and she drew a robed, trembling forearm across her forehead. Vesunia will be lost without intervention. The Hanged Man is an unwelcome addition. It speaks of greater evils to come. Without a change in fate, the reverberations may be great. Gunnar cursed. Feyre hobbled over to the tactical pit on unsteady legs, her head spinning. All are poor omens. There is a confluence at work. A new order begins to emerge, one that humanity will not like. She placed her hand on the commander's arm for balance. He looked down at it and then at her, the concern on his face plain. Seers and commanders were an unnatural pairing, the backgrounds coming from the far ends of the spectrum of what humanity could produce. But those who found partnership were a fearsome force. Gunnar guided Feyre over to a chair and settled her into it before returning to strategic Tom McComb.
Strategist, how serious would losing Vesunia be? Serious. We'd be looking at a highly networked breach with 2 greens. If those threats are reasonable hubs, it'd be an ideal staging ground to launch an attack here on Thoris.
And losing here was not an option. Holding Thoris was a priority. The deep domain deployment was sign enough of that. Few ships boasted a ship's complement containing a seer, a farcaster, and multiple gamblers, in addition to a bevy of other, more traditional capabilities. Intervention in Vesunia was possible, but it would further weaken local capabilities, which were already stretched thin across the sector. The deep domain had to cover Thoris's 23 green lines, and no fewer than 7 were under some form of threat. How is Farcaster Ho? Feyre asked from her chair.
Recovering. Perhaps she could send a single ship, but even that would tax her.
It is not my place to comment on strategy, so forgive me if I overstep. Feyre paused, gathering her breath. But I see a wave begin to assemble. It washes along the shore of humanity and threatens to overwhelm it, sweeping us up from our perches and out to sea.
Well, that's unsettling,
Markham said. The mysticism of those connected to chaos and fate always felt out of place amidst the grim reality of the military. But the mutual respect eventually formed on any vessel with access to both. The tactical opportunities expanded considerably when 2 were paired, and the results were undeniable. So much of humanity's rapid expansion was the product of magic and technology, a strange outcome given the long period in humanity's history when magic had been largely dormant.
Indeed.
Gunnar sat still for a moment, considering alternatives, hating the lack of information, but glad that he was at least given a chance to act. And he would act.
Fate needs to be changed,
he asked, looking again at Feyre. She gave a single nod.
A gambler, then.
Feyre nodded again. A powerful one, if there is to be only a single ship. Gunnar opened the comm link.
Gambler Ducker, you're needed on the bridge.
Aces, came the reply. The intervening minutes passed largely in silence, with Gunnar considering various alternatives and finding them lacking. There were simply too few farcasters to assemble a large fleet in a reasonable amount of time. The deep domain was far from central nodes, deploying as means of holding a large swath of space without the need for constant support. If there was a threat it could not deal with, it was under orders to abandon Thoris. As crucial as the node was, and perverse the deep domain, Gunnar was already running risks there, having drawn down his Farcaster's strength to the point where she would be unable to transport them out of the system. No, the best defense was a good offense. He needed to stop this wave before it started. A moment later, gambler Ezel Ducker made his appearance on the bridge. Each gambler had their own style, and Ezel was no different. He wore a snug-fitting leather jacket, embroidered with various symbols of meaning only to him and his culture. A broad, bright red sash was wrapped around his stomach and tied off in the side. His pants appeared to be painted on, and the colors were a kaleidoscope of garish, clashing nonsense. He looked ridiculous.
Gunnar,
Ezel said, giving a small nod. He was technically under the commander, but gamblers tended to follow their own set of rules. Indeed, attempting to apply rules to them was somewhat against the entire point of having them around. Still, more than one senior officer had met their eventual end of their tolerance for this constant, borderline insubordination that seemed to infect the gamblers.
Gambler Dakar,
Gunnar replied, maintaining official titles.
We have need of your services.
Ezel leaned against the wall and began to flip a coin along his knuckles, his eyes meeting with Gunner's.
I assumed. Where to?
Vesunia! Ezel's eyes shifted to Feyre, and then he arched a brow.
The cards?
Death, devil, hanged man in opposition, she replied.
The gambler made a face. Sounds fun.
There is a confluence. A wave builds, Feyre said.
Ah, well, that does make things more interesting.
Ezel looked around the bridge.
Just me, then. For our caster Hal's abilities are almost exhausted. We can send a single ship, so we are sending our strongest.
Ezel chuckled.
Gunner, no need to flirt. You already have my art.
The coin stopped moving across his fingers, disappearing in a small flourish, only to be replaced by 2 dice. He tossed them in the air and then snatched them. When he opened his palm, the single pips appeared. Snake eyes. He did it again. Snake eyes. Again. Snake eyes. Snake eyes. Snake eyes. Snake eyes. Then 2 and a 4. Finally, he stopped and gave a shrug.
Good. Uses up all the bad luck. Send me the details. I'll get prepared.
He gave a half-hearted salute to the commander and then a nod to the seer. A grim look on his face before shoving off the wall and retreating the way he came.
That didn't look good,
Markham opined from the pit.
Your contributions continue to astound, strategist,
Gunner replied.
And no, it did not.
He turned to Feyre.
Should we still send him?
If the gambler says go, he goes. Deep in thought, Esley made his way back to his lair, the coin once again bouncing along his knuckles. Many things felt wrong, but going somehow felt right. He could feel the ranges of possibilities move to the sides. There would be no middling outcome here. It would be a great victory or a terrible defeat. The volatility of it called to him. Moments of extreme were where a gambler could change the game. Still, he wished the cards had offered some hope. A knave, a king of cups, but there was nothing but the murderer's row of the nastiest Grand Arcana. It had been a long time since he had gone into a situation with a reading that grim, and he still carried the scars, inside and out, from that particular expedition. He palmed his way into his quarters. Farcosters and Hal stirred in his bed. They'd been pushing her too hard lately. When she had come to him last night, she had crawled into his arms and fallen asleep almost immediately. Esley had held her as she drifted in oblivion, her mind wandering along paths long and winding, always trying to find a way through the chaos. As he had stroked her hair, he hoped that the chaos within him wouldn't lead her astray. And now she would send him away, to some place that would change him, to some place that may kill him. She would blame herself. He wished she would not. He went where fate called him. There was no fault of hers that she simply provided the means of transportation. Esley sat down on the bed beside her.
Zen, they're going to ask you to send me to Vesunia.
She replied, still drifting in the space between asleep and awake. He rested a hand on hers, gripping it slightly.
Feyre says a wave builds. They need me to reverse fate.
Zen's eyes shot open now, a frantic look on them. But no, they can't. You can't.
This isn't a choice thing, Zen. This is a thing that needs doing thing. I can feel the ripples already. Someone needs to put the thumb on the scale.
He pulled her hand up to his lips and gave it a kiss, pressing his lips firmly into the flesh.
It might be a long time before we see each other again. When I come back, I might be different. You don't need to wait.
An angry frown settled on her face now. I'm not sending you. They can't make me. Esley smiled.
No, they can't make you. But it will happen all the same. The other gamblers aren't strong enough. Not for something like this.
Zen was silent for a long moment. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she asked the question as knew that she would, but had hoped she wouldn't. How was the reading?
Does it matter?
He replied. He would go either way. What use was there in making her more anxious about it? You can tell me, or Feyre will.
Death! The devil! Hanging in up.
That's suicide, she snarled. Why would you ever agree to something like that?
Because, Esley said, because, Zen, you know the path, and I will know what to do when I get there. This is what we're here for.
She was quiet. He gathered her up in his arms once more. She resisted for only a moment, and then sank into him. I'm scared, Esley. I thought that we would have more time. Esley kissed the top of her head.
I'm thankful for every moment that we've had, he said. It was unexpected, and it was beautiful.
The path to each other had been a wildly improbable thing. Under any other set of circumstances, impossible. But that was the way a gambler playing with fate. Many impossible things became simply improbable. When are you going?
As soon as the ship is prepared and you have the energy to send me. A few hours, I think.
A few hours, she asked. Esley nodded, his chin bouncing on the top of her head slightly. A lot can happen in a few hours, she said, her fingers slowly wandering up his thigh. The gambler chuckled. His bad luck really had run out. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.